as though something has happened in the motorcade route. There has been an assassination attempt in downtown Dallas.
Mrs. Ruth Paine probably knew the Lee Harvey Oswald family better than anybody living today.
I certainly saw Lee more than anyone else did in '63.
His wife was here from the end of September till the time of the shooting.
The suspect had visited Russia and was married to a Russian.
The marriage wasn't going very well. She was trying to make him be the husband she needed to have. I felt sorry for her. So I suggested that she come back and stay with me. To come back to the house brings it all to mind. Unbeknownst to me, it had been a rifle in the garage. As a Quaker, I didn't want any guns in the house.
Assassination weapon, a foreign-made rifle.
I realized the next day that he had come out to get his rifle. I guess that was my worst moment. Only Marina knew that he had already made an attempt to kill somebody. None of us had sensed that he was dangerous. How do you know? How do you know?
You have anything to say in your defense? There's a shot.
She went into the house to look for the blanket roll that she knew the gun was in. So her first thought was of Lee. We're at 2515 5th Street. It's the house that I used to live in. I don't think I've been back to the house since we moved out, which would have been the end of '65 or somewhere in '66, yeah. We're in the living room. Looks smaller than I remember it, but here it is. This is the bedroom that I was in with the two kids when Marina and her baby June moved in. Expectations about how many bathrooms you have were different back then. I always liked this kitchen. You could look straight out to the yard. Oh boy, the city of Irving has a job ahead.
Well, in 2009, the city purchased the house because it wanted to preserve its historic significance. The Irving Museum Board discussed what to do with the house and came up with the idea of restoring it back to its 1963 look.
It's very weird to think of this house as something that people want to come to and look at. And I don't think the heart of the real story is here in the house. It has more to do with Lee.
Ruth Hyde Paine found herself in the center of the public eye after she had unwittingly assisted a presidential assassin.
Mrs. Paine, how did this friendship between you and the Oswalds first originate?
I first met the Oswalds at a party in Dallas last winter.
I was invited to a party the 22nd of February in '63. Lee and Marina were invited, and Lee was in the kitchen surrounded by people that were interested in hearing about his going to the Soviet Union. He was kind of telling everybody what he'd done and pleased with having gone to the Soviet Union, that he tried to renounce his citizenship. Most of the evening Marina spent in the bedroom, and we visited a little bit. And she said that she just really didn't have any friends. I felt Marina was somewhat shy, but liked to talk. She was very pleased to have a woman to talk to, I think. She was really reaching out. She wanted to know somebody, and I felt sorry for her.
Isolation was something that Ruth related to. As a Quaker from Ohio, Ruth was still adjusting to life in Dallas, having recently moved to Texas with her husband, Michael Paine.
We met at a folk dance in Philadelphia. You know, he was that tall, handsome man across the room. Good dancer, very good dancer.
They married in 1957, and less than 2 years later, Ruth was expecting their first child.
I got pregnant, and Michael wasn't keen on my having a kid. And this was part of the tension in the marriage.
That tension remained even after their daughter was born in 1959, the same year that Michael's career as a helicopter engineer led them to relocate to the Dallas suburb.
Michael got a job with Bell Helicopter. That's when I packed up and went to Texas also. Okay, we're in front of the house that I lived in Irving. Irving had about 10,000 people at the time. It was small. I'm not sure I was really aware of a lot of what was going on in Irving or what people felt. It was a department store in Fort Worth. It was the first time in my life I saw a drinking fountain that said colored. I was just so stunned to actually see that.
Ruth's encounters with segregation were a significant departure from her experience with the Quakers, a Christian denomination that promoted equal rights and tolerance.
The groups that I've been acquainted with have a worldview, have a feeling that it's important to do something to help the world.
The world at this point was defined by the Cold War. A nuclear arms race was in full effect, and distrust had spread throughout the United States and Soviet Union.
We're talking Cold War here, and Quakers are looking around and saying, well, these are our, quote, enemies. We need to learn how to talk to our enemies. If you know people, if you have a face and a personality and you're acquainted, you can't demonize.
The Quakers started a grassroots effort to communicate with their enemies by learning Russian and writing letters to their comrades overseas. Ruth also attempted her peacekeeping efforts at home.
I was interested generally in languages, but I wanted to study Russian because it's important to talk to your enemies, as simple as that.
It was Ruth's interest in learning the language that first drew her to Marina. And while Marina welcomed the chance to find friendship in a foreign land, Lee Oswald wasn't making her transition very easy.
One of the things I felt most critical about him was his saying that he didn't want her to learn English. I felt that was a real obstacle for her and unfair of him. She was upset because he wanted her to go back to the Soviet Union, and she didn't want to go. The local Russian community had tried to help her, and that Lee didn't really want them to do that. The marriage wasn't going very well, and she thought maybe she was pregnant. Clearly, she was worried. Really, all I knew about their relationship was from her until later, when she stayed at my house for a while. When I learned that not only was she pregnant, but they couldn't get county care, they couldn't get prenatal care that they could afford. So I suggested that she come back and stay with me, at least until the baby was born. I was concerned at first that he might feel that his role was usurped, or that he would resent me for offering to have a place for her. But he recognized that she really needed someone who could translate, who could get her into the hospital if the baby started coming. I think he probably felt there was some risk in her having a friend to talk to, but he knew they needed something.
Reluctantly, Oswald agreed to the arrangement, and in September 1963, Marina and her daughter June moved in with Ruth and her 2 children.
It's a small house, so there was a living dining area. We had a table and dining chairs here. There was a living room. But the TV over here, new TV, black and white TV, our first. And there were 2 bedrooms. This was my bedroom in the house. So we had a big double bed and 2 cribs this size for the 2 kids. Worked pretty well. Marina was in here. In the other bedroom was a double bed and a crib and a bassinet. We pretty well filled up those bedrooms. The bedroom seemed so small. It was a pretty tight squeeze to get everybody in, but it worked all right. Starter home, it was absolutely great.
In exchange for lodging, Ruth did not accept payment from Marina, but she did accept lessons in Russian.
It was a wonderful opportunity for me, like having a private tutor. If I didn't know a word, she'd describe it in other ways, which is a great way to learn a language. I really needed the intellectual stimulation. I needed something going on in my life, and certainly something more than diapers and baby food. I felt it was a pretty good exchange. First of all, I was lonely. Michael had been out of the house for nearly a year. We had filed for divorce. It was great to have another woman in the house and sharing the same kinds of issues of young children and the issues about whether the marriage will work kind of things. And there was a lot of fellowship or a sense of friendship or community. She told me quite a lot about when she was growing up.
Marina met Lee Oswald at a dance in 1961 after he defected to the Soviet Union. They were married less than 2 months later.
I think she fell in love with him. There was probably an attraction of the exotic. He was not the local yokel.
Almost immediately, Marina became pregnant with their first child, June. After her birth, Oswald returned to the United States with his new family and settled in Dallas. But according to Ruth, their marriage showed signs of stress.
They sniped at each other, and all this in Russian, and Marina's Russian was much more fluent than Lee's, and he would get the worst of it in the argument, and finally he just ended up saying "Молчи," which means shut up, you know. I also saw them sitting on the sofa watching TV, and she would kind of sit on his lap, and they would have his arm around her, and there was clearly affection there. I think she felt very dependent upon him, and she certainly didn't want to go back to the Soviet Union.
Oswald's defection to the Soviet Union and return to the U.S. 2 years later caught the attention of the FBI.
2 agents came. Hosty was the lead agent. He said that he was interested in following Lee Oswald and what he was doing, that he'd been to the Soviet Union and was now back. For the FBI to be interested in where he was, that was certainly no surprise. This was the Cold War era.
But soon after the visit, Ruth began to see a different side of Lee Harvey Oswald.
I had begun to see Oswald do things that just weren't hooked together right. Just a week before the assassination, he asked to borrow my typewriter, and we set it up on the dining table there in the dining area. So I walked by, and he sort of put his arms over it like he didn't want me to see what he was typing. So that seemed strange. I saw a draft of the letter, and it was in English. It said that the FBI is no longer interested in my wife and I. And then it said something about Mexico, and I thought, well, that's not, I didn't know about that. That seems strange, too. I was worried enough about it that I decided to make a copy of it. And then I thought, well, when the hostie from the FBI comes out next time, I'll show him this and see what he thinks. We had his phone number in his rooming house because he thought we might need to call him when the baby came. But then I dialed that phone number and asked for Lee Oswald, and the lady said, there's nobody here by that name. And I checked the number. Is that the number? Yeah, that's the number. And I hung up in confusion. I didn't know why that number didn't work. She was terribly upset about his using a false name, and she said he likes to play these games. She was hoping he would change. Where I felt he was a threat had to do with how sensitive he was to people who might be critical of him. He talked about his political views, and especially with Michael.
I talked to him, I would think, only about 3 times that we had a conversation. He was stubborn, single-minded, put people in cubbyholes categories, and I didn't much enjoy talking with him.
I stayed clear of any kind of discussion with him. He would not take kindly to being criticized or being disagreed with. If you disagree with him, I felt he would see you as an enemy. I was doing usual household things, and I went out to the grocery store. We bought a lot of groceries. And when I got back, Lee was there on the front lawn talking to Marina. Lee was in the yard right here where we are, and I was surprised to see him because he had never come out on a weeknight. He hadn't called ahead or asked or said that he wanted to come out or anything, and that was very different because he usually asked permission to come out. He offered to help carry groceries in. As he passed me going into the house with groceries, I said, "Nasz president приедет," which means our president is coming. I was very excited about the president coming the next day. And he sort of brushed by. I don't really remember him saying anything. He was quite silent, I would say, that evening. And then went to bed early, about 9 o'clock, and I prepared my kids for bed. Then went to the garage to paint these blocks that I had made. When I walked into the garage, I saw that the light was on, and it surprised me because I knew I hadn't been in or left it on. I didn't think Marina had. So it was my judgment that Oswald had been in there and just carelessly left the light on. I realized the next day that he had come out to get his rifle. When I got up in the morning and got my breakfast, I saw that Lee was already gone, which is not a surprise, because he had to leave early, and he'd left a coffee cup in the sink, so I saw he'd had at least a cup of coffee. I got my kids up and ready to go to the dentist, and I turned on the TV to see the president in Fort Worth, where he was there for a breakfast. The news anchor was kind of filling time because the Kennedys were a little late for the breakfast in Fort Worth, where he was to make a speech. I was a bit stunned because he started talking about the assassination of President McKinley. I thought, it's in the air. I knew that there was a lot of worry about how Kennedy would be received in Dallas. There were just quite a lot of people who didn't like him. I think there was a sense that he might be in danger, because there was something in the newspaper, a very negative ad about Kennedy before he got here. There was a newspaper ad as if it were welcoming President Kennedy to town, but then saying all the things that they hated about what he did or who he was. It was very hostile, but there it was, a paid ad that was there when he arrived. Before the assassination, we were on a euphoria trip, really. Everybody was very happy about how things were going. I could see that the world was improving. The 60s were exciting. Real change was happening. So here was this young, very energetic president to come into office. The first president I had voted for who won. The family was wonderful. I identified with this young family. The girl was the older one, and then came the boy. My children were very close in age to their two children. For the most part, he did a good job for the country.
The president's car is now turning onto Elm Street, and it will be only a matter of minutes before he arrives at the trademark.
After the dental appointment, I came back home and was fixing lunch, but also watching the television. And we sat and watched a little bit as he arrived in Dallas.
Even the freeway was jam-packed with spectators waiting their chance to see the president as he made his way towards the trademark.
And I heard when they said shots had been fired from the school book depository.
There has been a shooting in the motorcade in the downtown area. Parkland Hospital has been advised to stand by for a severe gunshot wound.
Marina was out in the backyard hanging up close. I told Marina that they thought the shot had been fired from the school book depository.
Shots were fired. He happened to look up at about the 5th or 6th floor of the Texas Book Depository. He said he saw the rifle being pulled back in.
My thought was, Lee will be out this evening. It's Friday. He normally comes out. We'll hear about it from him. I lit a candle, and Marina said, is that a way of praying? And I said, yeah, it is. It was kind of prayer for him and for his family and for the country. We just sat there and watched and then waited until we heard that he had died.
The president, ladies and gentlemen, is dead at Parkland Hospital in Dallas.
We basically, like everyone else, were just glued to the TV at that point. And then mid-afternoon, 6 officers arrived at the front door. And they asked to come in. I said, do you have a warrant? And no, they didn't have a warrant, but we can get one right away. And then they said, we have Lee Oswald in custody for shooting an officer. I immediately assumed that he was also charged with shooting the president. I was standing here and one of the officers said to me, did Oswald have a gun? And I said, no, because no was what I thought. And then I translated to Marina, and she said, yes, he had a gun, and she indicated that she would show it to us in the garage. Later I learned that she went into the house to look for the blanket roll that she knew the gun was in, and thought it was there because the blanket roll was there. So her first thought was of Lee. I didn't know he had a gun until the day of the assassination in the afternoon. You know, as a Quaker, I didn't want any guns in the house, and it would not have permitted, I don't think, if I'd had any clue that he had a gun here. When Marina said that he did have a gun, we walked in here and she indicated this blanket roll on the floor. When the officers came in and asked about the rifle, the blanket was on the floor like this. And when the officer picked it up, it was so clear right away that there was nothing in it. When I realized that it all fit together, he came out unannounced on Thursday night. Unbeknownst to me, there had been a rifle in the garage, and now it was gone. I guess that was my worst moment, because it was at that point that I recognized that it could have been Lee that shot the president. So I was furious. I felt, you know, whatever these guys, police need to know, I'll help them in whatever way I can.
Ruth and Marina were driven to a Dallas police station for questioning. While Ruth was being interrogated, Marina was giving her version of the story to the authorities. But she neglected to disclose a vital detail about Oswald's past.
The crucial thing she could have done would be to say that he had tried to kill somebody in April. But that didn't come out until after the assassination.
General Edwin A. Walker, a controversial right-wing conservative, narrowly escaped his own assassination after a shot was fired into his home in April 1963. The shooter's identity remained a mystery until Ruth made a shocking discovery.
There was an Irving policeman kind of assigned to my front yard, so I would take things to that policeman, figuring that he could then deliver them to where Marina was. And I thought, well, she might want this book that we were reading that was about childcare. And I thought, well, I'll just send her the book. That might make her feel like she had some of her things with her. That turned out to be the book in which she had hidden a note that Oswald wrote when he first went out to shoot Major General Edwin Walker. Of course, when the book went to wherever Marina was, the police or Secret Service, whoever was with her, looked through it and outfilled the note. It was a very damning note. This is the key to the mailbox, and don't worry, the rent is paid for the next month, and if I don't come home, keep my papers but not my clothes, things like that. When it fell out of the book and they showed it to Marina, she had to say what it was. I understand her fear and reluctance, therefore, to talk to anybody about it. She was trying to make him be the husband she needed to have, and it really just wasn't working. Marina left the day after the assassination, that morning, on the 23rd, in the company of her mother-in-law, who had stayed overnight at the house here. And it wasn't until mid-afternoon or so that I got a call from Lee, and he wanted to speak to Marina. She hadn't come home, and I had kind of expected her to come back that night, but she didn't. I thought, well, I wonder where she is, and I thought, well, I know the name of the hotel they're staying in, so I'll just call the hotel. And I did that, and Marguerite Oswald answered the phone. And I said, I'd like to speak to Marina. And she would not let me talk to Marina.
It was clear to Ruth that Oswald's mother did not want her help and had no intention of reaching out to her son.
Mrs. Oswald said, well, we really can't be too concerned with what Lee thinks at this point. And I thought, oh boy, doesn't want me to talk to Marina, isn't concerned about what her son wants. And, you know, I had nothing more to say.
It's a terrible thing to judge a man before he is brought to trial, and in this case, a very difficult thing not to do. I began to wonder how they would ever get a jury that could give him an impartial trial.
Well, I had just barely seen that he wasn't really glued together terribly well. I had a feeling he would come apart in prison. Lee was to be moved from one spot to another, and as we watched, he was shot by Ruby.
Do you have anything to say in your defense? There's a shot. Oswald has been shot.
To see somebody come out of the crowd and just shoot him and have him carried off on a stretcher, it was such a stunning thing. There really wasn't words to describe it. Of course, we didn't know for a little while whether he was fatally shot. But when I learned that he was, I felt that it would simplify things for Marina. And that was very narrow-minded on my part, really, because it made things so much more complicated. Pretty soon, Marina had a lawyer and a business manager and folks around her who were making decisions for her. She did not contact me.
To the White House in Washington comes the final verdict on the fateful tragedy which engulfed the nation 10 months ago.
After a year of turmoil, Ruth and Marina began to move on with their lives, but their relationship was never the same.
Even a year later, when she invited me out to a house that she'd been able to buy, and we could talk about the kids, but what we really shared was the most horrible thing in either of our lives. Now, I'm further disappointed in the sense that she has been led by conspiracy people to think that maybe Oswald didn't do it, because I'm pretty sure that's not what her first thought was. I think people look to conspiracy because they really can't bear to think that it's that easy.
Police are still looking for the would-be assassin.
If we think that it takes a big effort of lots of people to kill the president, we haven't learned anything from this event. I asked myself, suppose Marina had told me that he had tried to shoot Walker, would I have taken action? And that's a terrifying thought. You know, what if she had shared that? Would I have done what I needed to do? What if I had recognized that he was dangerous? What was this fantasy life he was living that Marina talked about? What if I'd understood any of that? But, you know, that's not a sane place to go. How do you know? How do you know where somebody is unstable, where somebody is dangerous? The only really thing you know is what a person has already done. And in this case, only Marina knew that he had already made an attempt to kill somebody. Well, let's see if we have moths in our...
Bears.
Most of my life now, I can just not even think about it, do other things. But to come back to the house brings it all to mind. It's very sad. For me, it's very sad to be here. The house was fine. It wasn't the house's fault. But the things that happened, to know that the gun had been here and that he came out that night to get it, and to realize that none of us had sensed that he was dangerous. And my grief is the same grief that the rest of the people in the nation had. It was a loss of this terrific, wonderful president. All the hopes that we had for him and his family and what would happen. And he was gone.